Welcome back. This video is going to be a short one and it's about cell naming. Remember that cells all have a name. This cell that I've selected right now is E4, always the column letter first, then the row number. And our little box up here called the name box will tell us what the name of a cell is. So wherever I select, we have a cell. Here's D12. This is B15. Remember, we can also name ranges, which a range is a rectangular selection of cells. Though this range, for whatever purposes, is always top left to the bottom right. The top left cell is C10. The bottom right is D14. So that range is called C10 colon D14. That's how we write it. We write the colon, those two dots, on the keyboard in between our top left and bottom right cells when we're naming ranges. Now, we can also, sometimes that can be a little awkward, we can also name a cell using whatever name we like. So for instance, this cell is cell C4, but really it represents my September salary. Now up in the name box here we have C4, but if I want to name that cell something else, I can just click in my name box, I make my selection first, C4, and I can type in September Sal. Now the important thing when you name a cell is you can't use spaces or the minus sign. You can use the underscore, which is shift minus sign on the keyboard. But it's best not to use any punctuation or spaces at all. In fact, you can't use spaces. And you can't use a minus sign because it'll think you're actually mean to subtract two things. So I'll just call it septsal or septsalary. Maybe that's a little bit, oops, there we go. When you're done naming, it's very important you must hit enter. You can't just click somewhere else because it'll forget what you called that cell if you do that. So I've called that septsalary. I'll hit enter. And now I'll click somewhere. There's cell E7. But if I click back on what used to be C4, you'll notice it's now called septsalary. And you remember I mentioned it in passing that you can navigate to any cell in the spreadsheet by hitting Control G, by the go to. Well, lo and behold, look at this. It'll give you the list of names that you've come up with. We'll ignore the dollar signs and the D6 for now, but I'm not sure how that came about, something I must have done. Pressed a key without realizing it. But septsalary will show me all my names, and I can just say OK, and it'll send me right to what used to be C4 is now called septsalary. Now, why you would do that, we don't want to name, it would probably be very impractical to name all of these cells. It's not terribly useful to us. But later on, we'll see when we're working with spreadsheets that have special cells, and a special cell is just one we think is special because it's a number that sits all by itself somewhere that we want to refer to in many places. It turns out it will become very useful to name the cell, but we'll wait until later to sort of see why that might be the case. You can also name ranges. So if I wanted to call this October expenses, I could. So I can select a range, say Oct expenses, because it is my October and it's all my expenses. Remember, always hit enter. Don't put any spaces or any punctuation. Probably best in a cell name, in a cell, or in this case, a range name. Hit enter when you're done, and that range is now Oct expenses. Any of the cells in it are still what they used to be, but if I make that same selection again as the range, it's Oct expenses. And of course, if I hit Control G, I see all my names. Oh, it's added a new one, F7. Okay, well, I'm not sure why it's adding those. That's interesting. But anyway, I'll ignore that for now. But Oct expenses is now one of my names, or septsalary, and I can just click on septsalary or Oct expenses and click OK, and it will send me right to wherever that named range or cell is. So naming, we can just click on a cell or a range and click on the name box, make sure you hit enter at the end of it, and that's it for naming. Our last topic for the day is formulas in just a minute.